y'all, Dixie here. I don't know if y'all have seen, but the western part of the US has been getting bombarded with snow, and we won't know for sure till April or so, but it seems like the Sierra Nevada is going to have even more snowpack than it did when I thru-hiked the Pacific Crest Trail back in 2017. For those of y'all who are aiming to thru-hike the Continental Divide Trail this year, Colorado doesn't have as much snow, but their snow levels are higher than average for this year. So anyway, I felt like it was appropriate to talk about what it was like for me thru-hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in a high snow year, and just some tips for thru-hiking or section hiking in a high snow year. The first piece of advice that I can give you, and probably the most important one, is to go with a group. There is certainly something to the saying, there's safety in numbers. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to start your thru-hike with a group, but chances are, like I did, you'll make friends out there and you'll have a tramily that you can go into the areas with the high snowpack. If it wasn't for the friends that I made during my thru-hike in 2017, I'm not sure that I would have gotten through the Sierra Nevada, because there were times where they physically helped me through certain situations, like sketchy passes or crazy water crossings. Also, when we found ourselves in precarious situations, it was nice to have people to brainstorm with. That way we didn't rush in with the heat of the moment and make a bad decision. My next piece of advice is have good foot traction gear. I used Microspikes, but I feel like crampons would have been better. Basically, the skinny on this is Microspikes are more lightweight, cheaper, and they're pretty easy to put on and take off. Also, they're more durable on rock or gravel surfaces. So if you're going between patches of snow for real short distances, then you don't have to stress over whether your Microspikes are going to get torn up. They can be worn with trail runners or boots. I preferred to wear trail runners because it was in the summertime in the Sierra, so even though there was snow everywhere, it was pretty warm outside and I wanted footwear that had breathability, plus I just don't like boots. Crampons on the other end of the spectrum are typically more expensive, heavier, and they're not as simple to put on and take off. Plus, with most crampons, you don't want to walk for much time at all on gravel or rocks because it can bend the little teeth. So when you're in situations where you're having to put them on and pull them back off, then I feel like people can get a little relaxed with it or lazy with it and think, you know, I'll probably be okay on this next kind of sketchy spot without them, because they don't feel like putting them on just to have to take them right back off. And finally, crampons are more rigid, where Microspikes are stretchy and flexible to go onto your shoes. So typically crampons are designed to be worn with boots and more rigid footwear, but they do make crampons out there that you can wear with trail runners.
Yep. He lost his axe.
You lost it way up there.
Next, get a good ice axe and practice self-arresting. In my opinion, an ice axe is a must if you're going to be backpacking in a high snow year on a trail with steep slopes. An ice axe can serve multiple purposes, but on a thru-hike like the John Muir Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, you're typically going to use it for things like self-arresting if you were to fall, to control a glissade, or to cut snow for like cutting a path or cutting some steps in. When selecting an ice axe, you'll probably notice that the cheaper ice axes are made of heavier materials, where the more expensive ice axes are much more lightweight. That's just the name of the game, it seems, with backpacking gear. I shelled out the extra money for a lightweight ice axe. I went with the Camp Corsa because I knew in the Sierra I was already gonna be carrying heavy food loads. Bear canisters are required, and I just wanted to go as lightweight as possible, adding another piece of gear to the mix. If I was going to be doing something like mountaineering, then I may have selected a different ice axe, but this one did the trick. The length of your ice axe is also important. The rule of thumb is if you're standing upright and you hold the head of the ice axe in your hand with your arm down by your side, the spike of the ice axe should land somewhere between mid-calf and ankle length. Leashes. This is something to also consider with an ice axe, whether you want to leash it or not. Kind of sounds funny. Some people like to keep their ice axe on a leash and keep the leash attached to the wrist so that if they were to fall down a slope unexpectedly and lose grip of the ice axe, at least they could try to manage to pull it to them and then self-arrest. Or if they were to trip and not fall on the edge of a slope, then it might prevent the ice axe from tumbling down the cliff and them losing it. The other school of thought is if you were to fall down a slope and you don't have a good grip on your ice axe, then it could actually do more damage to you while you're tumbling down the hillside and the ice axe is bebopping around, chopping you up in the head. I still think I would rather take that chance than falling down a slope and having no option for self-arresting because my ice axe has fallen out of my hand. But this is one of those things where you're gonna have to make the decision that works best for you. Now, I didn't exactly practice what I'm preaching here, but I recommend, if you can, taking some sort of snow traversing course where you can practice and actually learn the proper technique for self-arresting. I did watch some YouTube videos before I went out on my trek of the Pacific Crest Trail, and luckily we met some folks before we got into the thick of it that were more experienced and showed us how to properly self-arrest with an ice axe. So I did have some minimal practice anyway. Something to remember while you're actually trekking through the snow up a pass, and that is 3 points of contact. Anytime you're in a spot where you certainly don't want to fall down, you keep those 3 points of contact. Now, what that means is typically you're going to have your ice axe in the hand that's on the higher side of the slope. So if you're going down trail and the snow is sloping up towards your left, then you're going to keep your ice axe in that higher snow side. In the other hand, you want to have something like a trekking pole or a walking stick, and then of course one of your legs will be in contact with the ground at any point in time unless you're hopping down the trail. I know there are some folks who really don't like using trekking poles, but in a high snow year while you're traversing through something like the Sierra, I highly recommend at least trying it out and having that extra stability. Another piece of advice is to time your passes properly. My group and I tried to camp near the base of a climb. That way we could ascend, traverse over, and then descend a pass earlier in the morning, because by late morning and certainly by noon, the snow on passes is getting slushy and you don't have as good traction as if you go early in the morning where there's still that icy crust on the top of the snow, where the nighttime cool air has kind of hardened everything up again, and that helps whatever foot traction you have, Microspikes or Crampons, to bite into that better and allow you to have a better grip while you're climbing over the pass. Sun cups. This is something I feel like I should mention just so you can already mentally prepare for it, because they will test your sanity. Sun cups are these depressions that you'll see in a snowfield, and they're just very difficult to walk over. Usually you're going to end up rolling your ankle because you don't know whether to step in the cup or on the edge of the cup, and there is no right answer. But at least they're pretty to look at. Sun protection. It may not be something you think about right off the top of your head, but it's very important to remember to protect your skin and eyes while backpacking on snow, because it reflects the sunlight, and I've even heard of people getting sunburns in their nose holes. So lather up with sunscreen, use hats, umbrellas, and or cover up with protective clothing. And don't forget your shades, but make sure they're good ones, not the cheap $5 special from Dollar General like I used to get. Next, look ahead at what other hikers are saying, but don't buy the fear-mongering too much. When I went through the Sierra in 2017, and even as I was approaching, I was checking Facebook because there were other hikers I had met earlier on in my journey that ended up ahead of me, and they were making posts every time they went to town and got service about what they had just been through in the last section of trail. One in particular that sticks out in my mind is Daniel Windsor, who actually also wrote a book about the experience that he had in the Sierra in 2017. So if you want to check it out to get an idea of what those of us who went through, then I'll put the link in the video description. But what I appreciated particularly about Daniel's posts is that he would share exactly what he had been through, what he did to mitigate his risk, etc. And he posted not only on his personal Facebook page, but in some Facebook groups for the Pacific Crest Trail. So it wouldn't hurt to become a member of these trail groups ahead of time if you're on the Book of Faces. But on the flip side of that, there were a lot of hikers who were wanting to look like superheroes that would just really embellish things. You know, they'd show a picture of a water crossing and say, oh my gosh, I just made it across this water crossing, and it would sure enough be like a raging river. But what they didn't share is that there was a log there that they crossed on. They didn't have to ford that crazy river. So, you know, always take what people say with a grain of salt. Sometimes there are just naysayers who are too afraid to leave their homes, let alone go on a through hike. So what I decided for myself was, hey, I can go in on this trail, and when I get to a certain point where I feel like this is beyond my capability, then I can turn around and safely walk on the same path that I just came through back to town and skip ahead. But I wasn't gonna let other people deter me from actually getting in there and deciding for myself. Even though I just said a word on fear-mongering, I do want to say be cautious with and also take serious the water crossings. The biggest issue for me with the high snow year wasn't so much the snow, but the fact that the snow melts and then all of the streams and rivers are swollen and much more dangerous. I have a video specifically addressing all of the details of how to safely cross a water crossing. So if you really want to see more in-depth information on that, I'll put a link to it in the video description. But basically you want to face against the flow of the water, so upstream, and you want to walk slowly at an angle, making sure each time you take a step that you've got good footing. And the reason you want to face the flow of the water instead of facing downstream is you don't want that pressure from the water pushing against the back of your knees and causing you to lose your balance and fall. A lot of people say when you cross a water crossing that you should unbuckle your pack, but I'm kind of in a different school of thought on that because I know how my pack carries, I know how I balance the weight of that on my body, and I'm used to walking with the pack weight up high on my hips. So as soon as I unclip my pack, it really throws me off balance and I don't feel as secure crossing a water crossing like that. I get that the idea is if you were to fall down, you want to be able to quickly throw your pack off of you so that it doesn't drag you down and you drown. But I guess I just go across with the mindset of knowing if I fall down, then the first thing I'm going to do is unclip my hip belt, unclip my chest strap, and get out of this pack. Because obviously it's much better to pull yourself out on some brush up on the side of the bank and have no gear because your pack's drifted away than to drown and, you know, have no opportunity for life. For many of the water sources on the PCT, we couldn't physically ford them if we wanted to. They were just too deep and strong, so we had to get creative. You might have to walk up and down the bank looking for a log to cross, or for a more shallow area, or even maybe where the water source has split into different sections, so crossing one section at a time is easier than fording the whole thing. There were some good resources for this. First, on the Pacific Crest Trail specifically, there was a water report. So you could read on the water report about those water sources, where the best place to cross might be. And two, in the Far Out app, previously known as GutHook, people can leave comments there about water sources and different waypoints. So there were comments about, you know, hey, half a mile upstream, there's a log across this stream. So I found those things very useful. In fact, I would say if you're going to be crossing crazy water sources, I wouldn't go unless I could check some sort of feedback from those who came before. The year that I thru-hiked, there were actually 2 girls that died drowning in water crossings, and one of them, unfortunately, was unnecessary because she drowned in a river that she didn't even have to cross. The river kind of did a little winding deal, and so if you followed the PCT proper, you would have crossed that winding twice. So you would have crossed the river twice. So if you just stayed to the right when you got to the river, you never had to cross it in the first place. So I would say that if there are resources like that, certainly make sure you have them and you can look ahead at other suggestions. Personal locator beacon. I always recommend that folks either have a personal locator beacon, if not something like a spot device or an inReach where you can two-way communicate. If not for your safety, then for peace of mind for your family. I had a one-use personal locator beacon when I went through the Sierra, and I made sure especially when I crossed water crossings, to have it attached to my person so that if I did fall down and lose my pack, at least I could call search and rescue for help. But going through the Sierra and not being able to communicate with my mom made me realize that I wanted it in reach after that trip. Mainly because I found myself rushing to get through a section so I could let my mom know I was okay, and if I took an extra day, then I knew she was probably stressing out. So just being able to communicate and let people know that you're okay, let alone having the ability to call for help if you need it, is just a good idea in my opinion. And that leads into my next tip, and that's let people know what your plan is. It's good to have a contact at home to say, hey, I'm going into this sketchy part of trail and I'm expecting that it's going to take me 7 days, but at a max it might take me 9. So if you haven't heard from me in 9 days, then please alert search and rescue because I might need some help. So how do you know when to start your thru hike in a high snow year and then when to enter the areas with the high snow pack? For example, there's always a rule of thumb, you know, don't leave Kennedy Meadows until a certain date, or don't go into the San Juans at a certain time. But those rule of thumb dates can certainly be switched up when you've got a high snow year, because you want enough snow to melt, but then maybe you don't want too much snow to melt. The earlier you go in, you're gonna have a lot of what we call snow bridges over these water sources. So you're probably not going to have to deal with fording crazy water crossings as much as people who go later in the year. But then you might be melting snow to drink because the water sources are all either snowed over or iced over. And while it might seem a lot easier in some ways, if you go in pretty early in the season, then you're going to be the trailblazer. You're going to be the one kind of choosing the routes, and everybody coming behind you is going to literally follow in your footsteps. So I would recommend, if you're going to go in early, that you have experience with traversing snow and that you also feel confident in your navigational skills, because there's not going to be an easy path to follow. And then on the flip side, the later you go, the more you're going to deal with post-holing in the snow, because the snow below the surface has started melting around trees and brush and rocks. You're definitely going to have more snow melt and therefore more sketchy water crossings. But the benefit is you can more or less just follow the packed down footprints to know where the best route is to go. But the biggest tip I can give you as far as when to start and when to enter these areas is really just be flexible with your schedule. I know start dates can be a little set in stone, especially with the trails like the Pacific Crest Trail where you have to get a permit to start. But you know, if you have to sit in town and wait a couple of weeks, having that flexibility built into your schedule and your budget is a great idea in a high snowpack year. My last piece of advice is consider a flip-flop thru hike. Remember that if you ever get to a point in the trail where you just feel like it exceeds your personal skills and abilities, then turn around, go back, and you can always flip up past that section like this Sierra if you're on the Pacific Crest Trail and go to an area where there isn't a bunch of snow. Unfortunately though, it seems like it's hard for people to come back and do a section of trail that they skipped over, because a lot of the folks that skipped the Sierra back in 2017 when I thru hiked, they got to Canada and they just didn't feel like hiking anymore. They wanted that to be the grand finale and to be done, and so a lot of them forfeited their thru hikes by never returning to Kennedy Meadows or to the northern end of the Sierra and going south. But of course you have to do whatever's best for you. I just want you to keep in mind that a flip-flop thru hike is absolutely still a thru hike. As long as your feet cover every mile of trail from start to finish, then you've thru hiked that trail. But also keep in mind that sometimes it is hard to come back once you've already passed the section up. Well, all right, y'all, that is all I have for you today on thru hiking during a high snow year. If you have any questions about my experience on the PCT back in 2017, or even better, if you have experience backpacking in high snowpack, then I'd love for you to share your advice in the comments to help people in the community. Thank y'all so much for watching, and we'll see y'all next time.